Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Christine Williams' warm and hopeful night in Genoa City took a devastating turn as the unthinkable happened. Christine was shot dead during a moment that should have marked a new beginning, but instead became a tragic turning point in The Young and the Restless, leaving the entire canvas of the soap shattered and the characters reeling from a loss that was not only sudden, but deeply personal, especially when Matt, in sheer panic and confusion, revealed a horrifying twist that no one saw coming. Phyllis was the mastermind behind the entire setup, pulling strings from the shadows like a puppeteer directing a macabre stage play. The evening had begun with a sense of promise, especially for Christine and Danny, who had recently rediscovered the spark they thought long gone. But in soaps as in life, happiness often draws the storm, and little did anyone realize how dark that storm was about to become. Christine, beloved, respected, and morally grounded, had faced countless enemies over the years, but this time the danger was not in the courtroom, not from an adversary across the aisle, but coming from within the tangled web of Genoa City's emotional politics, jealousy, old wounds, and unfinished rivalries, many of which led straight back to Phyllis Summers, whose history with Christine was soaked in decades of bitterness, heartbreak, rivalry, obsession, and unresolved emotional landmines, waiting for the right moment to detonate. The return of Matt had given Genoa City new mysteries, and though at first he seemed like another mysterious figure with a troubled past, his arrival eventually unraveled into something far deeper and far more sinister. Not because Matt was the villain, but because he was the pawn, manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to exploit weakness, ego, and desire for revenge. Phyllis, operating from behind the velvet curtains of the city's darkest stage, watching the chaos build brick by brick. The gunshot that echoed through the decorated hall rang out like a crack through the heart of the city, and in an instant, the festive atmosphere turned into a panic of screams, gasps, and stunned silence, Danny dropping to his knees beside Christine as her eyes widened in shock, the emotion too fast and too terrible to fully understand in the moment. Paul, who had returned that evening to try and offer some kind of peace to all the old wounds between himself, Danny, and Christine, rushed forward, but the scene was chaos. No one had seen the shooter clearly, and the sudden flash of the weapon had been masked by the low lighting and music. EMTs were called immediately, but Christine's pulse was fading fast, Danny's hands shaking as he whispered desperate pleas, refusing to believe that the woman he had loved for so many years, with whom fate had finally allowed him a second chance, was slipping away right before him. The paramedics worked urgently, trying to stabilize her, but as Christine was loaded into the ambulance, her hand slipping from Danny's grasp, there was a dawning sense among the crowd that this was not simply a shocking shooting, this was murder. As the guests stood in various stages of shock, it was Matt who looked the most broken. His hands were shaking violently, his face pale as paper, breathing short and ragged as officers began questioning those near the front entrance where the gunshot seemed to originate. Chance Chancellor, who had arrived late to the event, immediately took control of the investigation, barking orders, but while Danny, Paul, Sharon, and even Lauren tried desperately to piece together the events of the shooting, Matt suddenly collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his shaking hands, whispering something too quietly for others to hear until Chance leaned down and demanded he speak up. In that moment, the words Matt had been holding back spilled out in a terrified confession that reshaped everything they thought they knew about the night, the shooting, and the forces at work in Genoa City. Phyllis, she planned it. She planned everything. That single sentence hit the room like a second gunshot. Danny stared at Matt, bewildered, heartbroken, and furious all at once, unable to comprehend how Phyllis, the mother of his child, the woman who had stood at the same event not long before, could possibly be involved in something so monstrous. Paul's expression hardened instantly, decades of experience tightening in his eyes as he demanded Matt explain himself fully, and this time Matt did, voice trembling, guilt staining every word like blood on a confession letter. He had been manipulated. He claimed, coerced, threatened, and pulled into a scheme that spiraled beyond his control, and though he had gone along with some of Phyllis's demands initially, he insisted he never intended for anyone to be harmed, let alone murdered. But Phyllis had known Matt's weaknesses, had used emotional pressure, false promises, and veiled threats to push him into position, turning him unknowingly into the perfect scapegoat. According to Matt, this entire storyline, the mysterious circumstances of his arrival, the whispers around Christine, and the building tension between Christine and Phyllis had been part of a calculated plan designed for one thing: to destroy Christine permanently. Phyllis, burned by decades of rivalry and jealousy, especially seeing the renewed happiness between Christine and Danny, had decided that removing Christine from the equation was the only way she would ever stop losing, ever stop being the woman who came in second no matter how fiercely she fought. But Matt claimed it went deeper than that. Phyllis had become obsessed not with Danny but with winning. Winning against Christine. Winning against her old reputation. Winning against the narrative the town had written for her. Untrustworthy, reckless, and perpetually unable to stay out of her own way. This wasn't about love anymore, it was about ego, identity, and control. Matt's voice cracked as he told Chance and the assembled group that Phyllis had arranged for the weapon, arranged for access, and had fed him information about when Christine would be most vulnerable. But then something in the plan went wrong. The shooter wasn't Matt at all. Someone else had taken the shot, someone Matt believed Phyllis had hired separately, ensuring that if the plan was traced, Matt would look like the guilty party. Paul leaned closer, demanding details, and though Matt's words were scattered with panic, they painted a horrifying picture. Phyllis had been playing 3 games at once, manipulating Matt into position, arranging a hidden shooter, and preparing her own alibi so she could appear at the wedding with clean hands. Sharon, Lauren, and even Tracy were speechless, unable to reconcile the Phyllis they thought they knew with the one Matt described. But Paul wasn't shocked, not completely. He had known Phyllis at her worst, seen how far she could go when pushed to the edge, and though she had rebuilt her life more than once, old habits often returned when jealousy and rivalry became too strong to contain. Meanwhile, Danny, still numb and shaking, was torn between disbelief and dawning despair. He wanted to deny Matt's words outright, to defend Phyllis as the mother of Daniel, as a woman he once loved deeply. But he also knew history. Too much history. He had seen Phyllis take emotional shortcuts, moral shortcuts, and in the worst times, illegal shortcuts to get what she wanted. Now, with Christine fighting for her life in the hospital, Danny was confronted with the horrifying possibility that his past had come back with fangs, and that Phyllis might have taken away the woman he loved and waited decades to reunite with. Chance placed Matt under immediate protective custody, moving him out of the ballroom before someone in the crowd decided to take revenge. The media would soon have the story. The shooting of former DA Christine Blair Williams was not just headline material, it was political dynamite. But before the official press leaked the story, the hospital called with the news no one wanted to hear. Christine had died en route. Danny collapsed into Paul's arms, the devastation tearing him apart from the inside out, and for a moment even the stoic Paul was shaking, his lifelong love for Christine hitting him with the weight of a demolished future. Word spread across Genoa City with ruthless speed. Sharon stood in the hallway in stunned silence. Lauren sank into a chair, tears streaking down her face. Michael Baldwin, who had rushed to the hospital the moment he heard, covered his face with trembling hands, knowing that Christine had been his rival, his colleague, his friend, and someone he respected more than most. But no one's reaction compared to the brewing internal maelstrom inside Danny. The guilt, the rage, the disbelief. How could this be happening? And how would he ever navigate a world without Christine in it again? Paul tried to pull himself together enough to speak to Michael, but both men were struggling with the same impossible question: what now? At that moment, Chance entered with new information. Phyllis had vanished. Her phone was disconnected, her house empty, her credit cards inactive. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. That alone was almost a confession. Danny's entire demeanor changed. Rage ignited where grief had been. If Phyllis had fled, she was guilty. And if she was guilty, then she had to be found. But Phyllis wasn't someone who ran without a plan. She always had escape routes, backup plans, financial stashes hidden away, files stored in case she needed leverage. So the hunt began. Chance notified airport authorities, Border Patrol, and placed a statewide alert. But as Paul pointed out, Phyllis knew how law enforcement worked. She would have prepared for this possibility long before the plan went into motion. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the city, Phyllis was indeed on the move, heart racing, but not in the way anyone assumed. She wasn't celebrating victory, she was terrified. Someone else had fired the gun, and whoever it was had moved ahead of schedule, threatening to destroy her life even though she had never intended for Christine to be killed. But the problem with scheming, as Phyllis now realized, was that once the dominoes began falling, control slipped through your fingers like water. Christine's death became the single defining moment that shook Genoa City to its core, and as the night passed into early dawn, the city that usually hummed with restless ambition instead fell eerily silent, wrapped in the kind of grief that felt too large to be contained by walls, streets, or even voices. Danny remained at the hospital long after Christine's body had been taken away, unable to walk out into the world without her, unable to return home where memories would claw at him from the walls, furniture, and years of shared laughter that now felt stolen by the cold echo of a gunfire. He could still hear ringing in his head. Paul stayed with him, the two men not speaking much, because words seemed both worthless and impossible. What kind of sentence could describe a world where Christine Blair Williams was gone? Meanwhile, Chance worked relentlessly, sending out orders, reviewing security footage from the venue, combing digital records, and interrogating attendees one by one to build a timeline. But while the detective in him pushed forward with the calm patience of procedural discipline, the family side of him, the Chance who cared deeply for Christine as a person, was rattling against the bars inside his own chest. The initial timeline was bleak. The venue camera showed a figure in a hood leaning near the staff hallway, but the lighting was too poor to identify them. Matt had been nearby shortly before the gunshot, but the angle showed his hands empty. Most damning, shortly after Christine was shot, Phyllis was seen on footage walking briskly toward the rear exit with her phone in her hand, though nothing in her posture suggested panic, and to an investigator like Chance, emotional neutrality often meant one thing: planned getaway. But just as Chance leaned toward believing Matt's confession, Michael Baldwin confronted him with a lawyer's cold logic. Matt had every reason to lie. If he were the shooter or accomplice, then shifting blame to Phyllis would buy him sympathy and time. In the chaos of trauma, people repeat things they've been told, and Phyllis had indeed crossed more lines in the past than most, but even Michael, who loved Phyllis but could not always defend her choices, needed proof before he allowed the narrative to swallow her whole. Danny overheard that conversation and snapped, slamming his hand against the wall and shouting that if Matt had lied, then Matt had signed Christine's death warrant twice, once with the gun and again with the lie. Paul stepped between them, reminding Danny that rage rarely led to clarity, but Danny was unraveling fast, and even Paul could see that grief was becoming a source of combustion inside him that could push him toward decisions he'd later regret. But grief wasn't confined to the hospital. News traveled fast, hitting phones, social media, and the Genoa City rumor mill like wildfire, waking up residents who never expected to start their morning with tragedy. Sharon stood in crimson lights before sunrise, wiping down the same counter repeatedly, trying to find something for her hands to do while her heart clenched tight in her chest. Lauren called Phyllis's phone again and again, her voice shaking, leaving voicemails that blurred between anger and pleading. "Phyllis, if you're innocent, you have to come back. If you're not, God help you." Nikki Newman woke with Victor beside her, the morning news appearing on screen and freezing both in place before Nikki whispered that she didn't understand how Christine, one of the strongest, brightest, most unwavering presences in their orbit, could simply be gone. Abbott Manor received the news in a painful wave. Tracy sank onto the sofa, stunned beyond tears, while Jack closed his eyes tightly, realizing that yet another tragedy was about to fracture the city further, because Christine was not just a legal powerhouse, she was loved across rival families, friendship lines, and professional divisions that rarely overlapped. Ashley heard the news from Paris, sitting alone in a hotel room after meeting with her own doctors, and the shock sent her spiraling into a panic attack that had her gripping the edge of the bed. Because Christine was one of the few women in Genoa City Ashley respected almost without reservation, and the idea that someone had shot her, murdered her, pulled Ashley back toward a darker internal space she had been fighting to escape. But while hearts broke across the city, Phyllis Summers was not hiding in a hotel room drinking champagne over her victory, as some assumed. She was running for her life. She sat alone in the back of a rideshare heading toward the industrial side of town, staring out the window with eyes swollen from crying because she couldn't go home, couldn't go to Red Phoenix, couldn't even call Lauren or Daniel. The nightmare unfolding was too real. If she stepped forward now, the police would arrest her before she had the chance to explain anything. Worse, she wasn't entirely sure how much of Matt's story was manipulation and how much was truth. If Matt had brought a gun, if he had acted independently, if someone else had layered their plan onto hers. Phyllis had indeed manipulated Matt, yes. She had taken advantage of his instability, yes. She had been desperate to stop Christine and Danny from rekindling their romance, yes. She had even considered sabotaging the evening socially, emotionally, or professionally. But murder was not her plan. That was the one truth she clung to like a life raft in freezing water. Someone had taken the situation further. Someone had fired the gun. Someone wanted Christine dead. And someone wanted Phyllis to take the fall. In the back seat, Phyllis whispered to herself, voice breaking. Who set me up? Because if Matt was telling the truth, then he had been a puppet like she was. If he was lying, then she was being framed. And suddenly, someone's name floated up in her mind. Someone with motive, opportunity, and enough emotional darkness to weaponize revenge in ways no one else could. Jeremy Stark. He was dead, yes, supposedly. But the body had been identified under difficult circumstances, and more than one resident had whispered that the entire situation felt off. If Jeremy wasn't dead, if he had associates, if someone loyal to him had been waiting for the perfect moment, Christine's shooting could have been the final chess move in a game that Jeremy had begun years ago when Phyllis double-crossed him. But speculation wouldn't clear her name. Phyllis needed proof. And she needed someone who could help her dig without turning her in. There were few people who fit that list, but one did. Her rideshare stopped near the abandoned waterfront warehouses, and from there, Phyllis slipped into an alley, using a hidden exit behind one of the buildings to enter a side door leading to a dim office apartment. Michael Baldwin's former PI contact, Carson, once known for working on both sides of the legal fence, sat waiting, already alerted by a cryptic text Phyllis had sent an hour before. Carson was not shocked to see her disheveled or terrified. Genoa City had a way of producing nights like this, and he gestured for her to sit before asking the question everyone else would. Did you kill Christine? Phyllis stared at him, eyes glassy, voice cracking as she said, No. But someone wants everyone to think I did. Carson didn't judge, he simply asked for details and Phyllis poured it out. The manipulation of Matt, the plan to socially embarrass Christine, the sudden shooting, the disappearance of the gunman. Carson leaned back, rubbing his jaw, and said something that made Phyllis's blood run cold. If you didn't know who fired the shot, then someone else was in the room with a better vantage point and better planning than you had. And that means this wasn't emotional heat of the moment retaliation. It was a contract job. Phyllis felt her throat tighten as 1,000 puzzle pieces began rearranging in her mind. If someone had hired a professional, then this went beyond rivalry, into territory Christine had built her career prosecuting. Corporate retaliation, political payback, or long-term revenge. Back at the police station, Chance was pinning printouts onto a caseboard, photos of the venue layout, still images of attendees, timestamps from camera logs, Matt's signed statement. Sharon dropped off coffee for him, trying to support him the way he always supported others, reminding him gently that investigators often felt guilty for not preventing tragedies they could never have predicted. Chance thanked her quietly but didn't look up, because he was staring at a single still frame that showed something disturbing, a partial reflection in the chrome of a wall sconce near the staff service hallway, showing a second figure behind Matt, at the exact angle of the gunshot. The reflection didn't show a face, just the outline of a sleeve and elbow extending in the firing direction. Chance's pulse kicked. If this image could be enhanced, they might identify the true shooter. He called the forensics tech, ordering digital reconstruction. Meanwhile, Matt, now in a holding cell, sat alone, head in his hands, repeating the same tortured mantra over and over. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Paul questioned him again, this time more targeted. He asked how Phyllis contacted him, whether she had mentioned a second operative, whether Matt had noticed anyone trailing him. Matt confessed that 3 nights earlier, while meeting Phyllis outside the Grand Phoenix, they had been watched. He couldn't prove it, but someone across the street had been staring at them through tinted car windows. Paul pressed for details, but Matt didn't remember the license plate or model. Only that the headlights flickered twice, almost like a signal. Danny, overhearing part of the questioning, burst into the room demanding answers, but Chance pulled him out, reminding him that interfering could jeopardize the case, and that Christine deserved justice that would hold in court, not a rush of violence that would bring another tragedy. Danny sank into a chair in the hallway, shaking, whispering that he had lost one of the few people who ever truly believed in him. Paul placed a hand on his shoulder, his own voice strained. I know. I feel like I lost my heart tonight too. There was no comfort to offer, no wisdom to share, because all roads forward felt bleak. And then, just as the darkest moment settled over the station, an officer rushed in with breaking news. Phyllis's car had been found abandoned near the shipping district, driver's door open, purse left behind. To the department, that looked like flight. To Danny, it looked like guilt. To Paul, it looked like a setup. And to Chance, it looked like something else entirely, fear. He ordered a forensic sweep of the scene, but before he could assign a team, another officer called out from across the lobby with even more shocking news. Someone claiming to represent Christine's shooter had sent an encrypted email to the station's anonymous tip line. The email contained only one sentence. "The wrong person is about to be arrested. Stop chasing ghosts." Chance's eyes narrowed. Someone out there was playing a larger game, and this wasn't just about Christine. This was about power, about leverage, about a message. And the thought that Christine might have been targeted not because she was Danny's love, or Paul's partner, or Phyllis's rival, but because she stood in the way of something bigger, made the entire situation turn from emotional crime to political chess.